The story opens with a dilemma that's more than just a question of life and death. It's about the power of prejudice, even when a loved one's life is in danger. Eric has lived with certain beliefs all his life, opinions shaped by his experiences and society. He's a proud man, with strong views on people and places, and it's never been challenged in a way that tested his core. But now, faced with the agony of watching his wife, Julia, suffer, Eric's certainty in his beliefs collides with his desperation to save her. In these harrowing moments, the question looms: how far can pride and prejudice go, even when the life of someone you deeply love hangs by a thread? The story's themes begin to emerge subtly but undeniably. Eric's pride runs deep, guiding his thoughts and actions, and he is convinced that his choices, his views, are justified. Yet, alongside his pride, there is compassion, the kind he feels deeply for Julia, who means the world to him. She's his partner, the one who's been by his side through ups and downs, and seeing her in pain is tearing him apart. But then there's the prejudice, the quiet belief that some people just aren't as capable, especially in critical matters like these. Pride, compassion, and prejudice. These emotions swirl within Eric, each tugging him in a different direction, each intensifying as he faces one of the most challenging moments of his life. In the heart of a bustling, fast-paced city, the setting shifts to a high-stakes environment where lives are saved and lost every minute. The hospital, a place brimming with urgency, stands as a testament to both humanity's greatest capabilities and its fragility. It's filled with hurried footsteps, beeping monitors, doctors and nurses rushing from one room to another, every corner humming with life-saving efforts. The bright fluorescent lights shine down on beds, machines, and faces filled with concern, exhaustion, and hope. This place has seen everything from triumph to despair, and today Eric finds himself at its center, hoping for a miracle. Amid this intensity are the three main characters: Julia, Eric's wife, who lies unconscious on a hospital bed, fragile yet fighting; Eric himself, an anxious and tense figure who watches her from a distance, his mind filled with turmoil; and Dr. Alina Chen, the attending doctor, a dedicated professional who has faced countless crises. Dr. Chen is respected in her field, known for her skill, dedication, and calm demeanor under pressure. But none of that matters to Eric as he watches her approach. He doesn't see her qualifications or her reputation. Instead, his mind is clouded with doubt and bias, a perspective shaped by deep-seated prejudice. Eric is about to be faced with his worst fears and forced to question everything he believes about people, their roles, and their value. The story takes a sharp turn as Julia's condition takes a dire twist. Rushed into the emergency room, her life seems to hang by a thread, and the only thing keeping Eric going is the hope that she's in good hands. For a moment, he feels relief, a brief glimmer of comfort, until he sees the doctor assigned to her case. As Dr. Chen introduces herself, the relief drains from Eric's face, replaced by a look of shock and anger. In his mind, the sight of Dr. Chen is an affront to everything he believes in. He stares at her, not seeing the doctor ready to save his wife, but instead an unwelcome figure who challenges his views. Eric's fear begins to mix with anger, and his prejudice takes over. All the biases he's harbored rise to the surface, blinding him to the reality that Dr. Chen is, in fact, the best chance Julia has. He feels a sense of betrayal by the hospital, a disbelief that someone like Dr. Chen would be put in charge of something so precious to him. He wrestles with himself, torn between his love for Julia and his ingrained biases, and yet his prejudice gains ground, overshadowing his love. His mind is clouded with irrational fears, each one building on the last, casting Dr. Chen as an enemy rather than a healer. The battle raging within Eric is fierce. He loves Julia deeply, wants her safe, and yet his prejudice drives him to doubt the very person equipped to save her. It's as if he's fighting two opposing forces within himself: his devotion to his wife and the beliefs that have shaped his identity. Every glance at Dr. Chen fills him with resentment and fear, and with every heartbeat, the conflict intensifies, pushing him closer to a decision that could have grave consequences. As Eric stands in the emergency room with the chaos of the hospital around him, he realizes he must act. But instead of seeking peace, he's overtaken by his prejudice, preparing to make a choice he may come to regret deeply. Eric's simmering prejudice boils over into action as he makes his demands loud and clear. He insists on having another doctor, Dr. Smith, someone who aligns with his expectations and biases. His voice rings out in the sterile emergency room, filled with a combination of urgency and indignation. The nurses, accustomed to dealing with emotional outbursts from family members, attempt to calm him down, yet his resolve is ironclad. He glares at Dr. Chen, a mixture of frustration and mistrust evident in his expression. In his mind, he's justified, acting in the best interest of his wife. But to the onlookers, it's clear that his prejudice has taken control, clouding his judgment. The medical team is placed in a precarious position, caught between their duty to care for Julia and Eric's refusal to allow Dr. Chen to proceed. The staff exchange uneasy glances, their hands tied by hospital policy and Eric's stubborn insistence. They're trained to focus solely on saving lives, on treating each patient without bias. However, Eric's fervent demand for another doctor complicates matters, forcing them to stall Julia's treatment. Tension builds in the room as every second ticks by, seconds that Julia cannot afford to lose. Hospital personnel try to reason with Eric, explaining Dr. Chen's expertise, her reputation, her dedication. But their assurances fall on deaf ears. To Eric, nothing they say matters. He's fixated on his perception of Dr. Chen, blind to her competence and the very real threat that his prejudice is imposing on his wife's life. As Eric stands firm in his demand, Julia's condition takes a turn for the worse. Monitors beep frantically, alerting everyone to the urgent need for immediate intervention. Nurses scramble to adjust her IV, and her pallor becomes even more pronounced. But Eric, blinded by his prejudice, can't see the urgency with the clarity he needs. All he sees is his pride, his belief in what he thinks is right, overriding the pleas of the staff around him. Dr. Chen, standing nearby, maintains her professionalism, but the anguish in her eyes is evident. She's ready to help, to use her knowledge and expertise to save Julia, but she's trapped by Eric's choice. A choice driven by a prejudice so strong that it endangers the person he loves most. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, Dr. Smith arrives on the scene. Eric's face relaxes slightly as he sees the doctor he requested, finally feeling that things will go as they should. But the relief is short-lived as Dr. Smith, after a quick examination, delivers a new, unexpected challenge. Julia has a rare blood type, O negative, and they're running low on blood supply. She urgently needs a transfusion, but with the hospital's reserves stretched thin, they cannot guarantee they'll find the match she needs in time. The news hits Eric like a ton of bricks. His insistence on delaying treatment has cost Julia precious minutes, minutes that now mean the difference between life and death. He feels a flicker of panic, the first real acknowledgement of his mistake, yet his pride clings stubbornly, refusing to admit the role he played in the delay. Dr. Smith explains that if they can't source the blood immediately, Julia's chances grow slim. Eric's earlier confidence crumbles, replaced by a fear that's even deeper than his prejudice. He stands there, shell-shocked, realizing the severity of his choice and its impact. As he grapples with the news, the hospital staff starts to mobilize, making calls to locate O-negative blood. The frantic nature of the scene intensifies, every member of the team working against the clock. And in the midst of the chaos, Dr. Chen steps forward, a determined look in her eyes. She has O-negative blood. She can provide the transfusion Julia desperately needs. The air shifts, the tension hanging heavy as everyone processes her offer. Dr. Chen's calm voice cuts through the chaos, her tone unwavering as she explains her willingness to donate her own blood. She doesn't do this for praise or recognition, but because it's her duty as a doctor and as a human being. For her, this moment isn't about Eric's prejudice. It's about compassion, a trait she has nurtured through years of facing similar situations. Her calm, unwavering commitment to Julia's well-being is clear, and for the first time, Eric is faced with a reality that he can't ignore. The person he tried to reject is now offering him and Julia the most selfless act he's ever witnessed. Eric's internal struggle intensifies. He's never seen an act of kindness that confronts his biases in such a raw way. Everything in his worldview is challenged by Dr. Chen's simple, powerful decision. As she prepares for the transfusion, there's a sense of solidarity among the hospital staff, who admire her willingness to transcend prejudice and focus solely on the care of her patient. The contrast is stark. Where Eric's prejudice delayed treatment, Dr. Chen's compassion offers hope, bridging the divide with a single transformative gesture. As the transfusion proceeds, the room falls into an intense, reverent silence. The team works diligently, Dr. Chen's strength flowing into Julia, her gift of life countering Eric's prejudice with action, not words. Eric watches in stunned silence, his heart pounding as he realizes the magnitude of what Dr. Chen is doing. She's proving him wrong, not with accusations or arguments, but with an act of pure humanity that defies his deeply held beliefs. He stands there, a mixture of guilt, shame, and awe coursing through him. This moment, this quiet, powerful act of sacrifice, cracks open the walls of prejudice he's built up over the years, replacing his assumptions with a truth he never wanted to confront. The transfusion begins, and with it, a profound sense of hope settles over the room, mingling with the unspoken tension that has hung heavy in the air. The medical staff moves with silent efficiency, carefully monitoring every detail to ensure Julia's body accepts the blood. Dr. Chen remains composed, lying on a nearby cot with an IV line connecting her to Julia. She appears calm, but her focus is absolute, her gaze occasionally shifting to Julia, observing every subtle change in her condition. This act is more than a medical procedure. It's a gift, an intimate, personal connection formed between two people who, only minutes ago, were strangers. As the blood flows from Dr. Chen's body into Julia's, a new layer of complexity fills the room. Eric stands on the other side, watching as the woman he scorned so deeply becomes Julia's lifeline. He's frozen, unable to look away from the sight of Dr. Chen lying there, her expression resolute. In this moment, she isn't merely a doctor to him. She's the embodiment of selflessness, transcending his prejudice with a calm dignity he's never witnessed before. He had dismissed her based on her appearance and his own preconceptions, believing her unworthy. Yet here she is, offering a part of herself in the most literal sense to save his wife. The reality of the situation hits him with a force that leaves him breathless. He remembers the harsh words he spoke earlier, the way he demanded she step aside as if her skills and dedication could somehow be erased by his biases. Each of those words now echoes in his mind, tainted with the weight of regret. Watching Dr. Chen lie there, sacrificing her strength, he feels a mixture of emotions that clash inside him: guilt, shame, admiration. He's witnessing a level of compassion that shakes his understanding of people, and his long-held beliefs begin to feel hollow and small. With every drop of blood that passes from Dr. Chen to Julia, the tension shifts. The nurses and doctors watch quietly, aware of the gravity of what's happening. They know Dr. Chen well. They've worked beside her, seen her dedication and kindness. To them, this act is no surprise, yet they feel its power, its symbolic weight. Dr. Chen has chosen compassion over bitterness, action over argument. She could have refused. She could have stood aside and let another take her place, but she didn't. She's showing everyone in the room, especially Eric, that true strength lies in empathy, in the courage to set aside ego for the sake of another. Time seems to slow as Eric continues to watch the transfusion. Julia's complexion starts to regain a hint of color, a soft flush replacing the ashen pallor that had terrified him only moments before. He notices her breathing grows steadier, each inhale and exhale bringing her back from the edge. Relief floods his heart, but it's quickly tempered by the realization of how close he came to losing her, and how his own prejudice nearly sealed that fate. His earlier anger, his conviction that Dr. Chen wasn't the right doctor, now feels foolish, juvenile, and petty in the face of her kindness. Dr. Chen finally closes her eyes, exhausted but unwavering, as the transfusion nears completion. She looks peaceful, as if content in knowing that she's done everything she can, that she's fulfilled her duty not just as a doctor, but as a human being. For her, this isn't about proving Eric wrong or changing his mind. It's simply an act of empathy, a natural response to someone in need. And for the first time, Eric realizes that Dr. Chen isn't seeking his validation, his gratitude, or even his understanding. She did what she did out of a genuine desire to help, regardless of how he might view her. As the final drops of her blood complete the transfusion, the room seems to exhale with relief. Julia's vital signs are stabilizing, and the nurses exchange glances of cautious optimism, silently celebrating this small victory. Dr. Chen opens her eyes briefly, her gaze meeting Eric's for the first time since the transfusion began. Her expression is tired yet kind, a silent reminder of everything she's just given. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. Her actions have spoken louder than any words could, leaving an indelible mark on Eric's heart and mind. In that moment, Eric understands the depth of her compassion. He feels a crack in the foundation of his beliefs, a shift that he never expected, brought on by the quiet strength of a woman he once dismissed. Dr. Chen's sacrifice stands as a testament to the power of humanity over hate, of compassion over prejudice. Her blood now runs in Julia's veins, a permanent connection between them that Eric can never deny or ignore. He realizes that he owes her more than just thanks. He owes her an apology, a recognition of the error in his thinking, and a commitment to see people as they truly are, beyond the limitations of his assumptions. With Julia's life no longer hanging in the balance, Eric finally feels the weight of his prejudice begin to lift, replaced by a newfound respect, not just for Dr. Chen, but for the idea that kindness, humility, and open-mindedness have the power to change even the hardest hearts. This moment, he knows, will stay with him for the rest of his life, reshaping him in ways he hadn't thought possible. And as he stands there, watching Dr. Chen recover from her sacrifice, he knows he is forever indebted to her, an extraordinary woman who showed him the true meaning of humanity without ever uttering a single word. Julia's condition has finally stabilized, and the energy in the room shifts from tension to relief, rippling through everyone like a quiet sigh of gratitude. Monitors beep steadily, reassuringly, in a rhythm that feels like a lifeline to Eric. He watches his wife, his heart swelling with overwhelming relief, realizing just how close he came to losing her. His whole body relaxes, his shoulders sinking, the tight knot of fear in his chest loosening. But with that relief comes something else, an uneasy, sinking feeling. He's confronted by the memories of the harsh words he flung at Dr. Chen, the mistrust that led him to delay her care and nearly cost Julia her life. As the medical team carefully finishes their work, Eric is left in the aftermath of his choices, each one echoing louder in the quiet room. He glances at Julia, her face finally peaceful, the faint color returning to her cheeks. Yet, that sight, which should bring him joy, is tainted by a deep sense of shame. He knows now that he has Dr. Chen to thank for this precious second chance. Dr. Chen, who didn't hesitate to give her own blood, her strength, and her time to save his wife, even when he doubted her from the very beginning. His relief mingles with guilt, each feeling intensifying the other until he can hardly bear it. Dr. Chen has retreated to a nearby seat, exhausted but steadfast, her presence as calm as ever. There's a serenity in her that he now recognizes as true strength. He recalls how he tried to push her away, dismissing her with prejudice and assuming she was somehow unworthy. Yet, in her silence, in her selflessness, she had dismantled everything he thought he knew. She hadn't needed to argue, to defend herself, or to prove anything. She simply acted out of kindness and dedication. In doing so, she held up a mirror to him, revealing not just his biases, but his own limitations, his weakness in failing to see beyond his assumptions. Eric approaches her slowly, each step weighted with the realization of what he's done. He struggles to find the words, feeling the gravity of an apology that feels inadequate, too small to encompass the debt he now owes her. His voice is soft, almost fragile as he begins to speak. "Dr. Chen, I don't even know where to start. I was wrong, in so many ways. I judged you without knowing anything about you, and I almost let that mistake cost me Julia's life." Dr. Chen looks up, her expression gentle but unreadable. She has heard apologies like his before, from others who have doubted her for similar reasons, but there is something in Eric's tone that feels genuine. She nods, acknowledging his words, allowing him the space to express the remorse he clearly feels. He stumbles over his sentences, words tumbling out as he tries to convey just how deeply he regrets his actions. He tells her that his prejudice blinded him, that he let his pride control his decisions when Julia needed him to see clearly. "You didn't just save her, Dr. Chen," he adds, his voice breaking. "You saved me from my own ignorance. You've shown me something I was too stubborn to see." Dr. Chen remains quiet, listening, allowing him to release the burden of his guilt. She understands the difficulty of confronting one's own prejudice and the courage it takes to admit fault. For her, this moment is not about resentment or retribution, but about the hope that her actions might shift his perspective, open his eyes to the humanity he'd ignored. When Eric finally pauses, she speaks softly but with conviction. "Eric, prejudice is a powerful thing. It clouds judgment, creates distance between people. I'm not angry at you, but I do hope you can carry this lesson with you, not just today, but in all the days to come." Her words strike a chord in him, resonating with the intensity of a revelation he knows will stay with him. She isn't just talking about this one moment. She's asking him to look at himself and at others differently from now on, to see beyond the limits he has placed on the world around him. He realizes that this lesson extends far beyond the hospital, beyond this one act of compassion. It's a call to embrace empathy, to view people not through the narrow lens of bias, but through the broad, inclusive scope of their character and actions. Dr. Chen has given him more than a reason to be grateful. She's given him the opportunity to change. Feeling the weight of this transformation, Eric bows his head, overwhelmed by gratitude and the humility that comes with recognizing one's own faults. "Thank you, Dr. Chen," he says, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've given me a gift I can't ever repay. I promise I won't forget this. I'll do better. I'll be better." Dr. Chen nods, accepting his words, but her expression suggests she hopes he'll honor this promise in ways that extend beyond this room. Her impact on him is clear, a reminder of the power each of us holds to influence others through our actions and choices. She stands, extending a hand, and he takes it, feeling the weight of her forgiveness in that simple gesture. It's a moment of reconciliation, a meeting of two people who, just hours before, stood on opposite sides of a divide built on misunderstanding. Now, that divide has been bridged by compassion, the gap between them closed by a shared humanity. As Eric watches her leave, he feels lighter, not because his guilt has disappeared, but because he now has a path forward. He knows that this lesson isn't confined to this hospital room. It's something he must carry into his everyday life. He thinks about the countless others he may have judged unfairly, the moments he may have allowed prejudice to cloud his understanding of others. He feels a sense of purpose forming within him, a commitment to honor the lesson Dr. Chen taught him, to extend the same compassion she showed him to those he encounters in his life. In those quiet moments by Julia's side, Eric reflects on his vow, feeling the responsibility of it settle deeply within him. He realizes that Dr. Chen has given him more than forgiveness. She has given him a vision of what he could be, the kind of person who sees beyond appearances, who values character over assumptions. And as he takes his wife's hand, grateful for the second chance they've been given, he knows he is forever changed by the experience. It's a promise, an unspoken bond between him and Dr. Chen, and one he intends to fulfill for the rest of his life. The hours pass quietly in the hospital, and as morning light begins to filter through the windows, Julia stirs, her eyes slowly opening, soft and hazy with the lingering effects of medication. Eric leans forward, his heart surging with relief as he sees her awake, the depth of his love and gratitude overwhelming him. He speaks to her gently, sharing in whispers the pieces of the night she missed, his voice a mixture of tenderness and regret. There's so much he wants to tell her, how close he came to losing her, how he almost let his prejudice jeopardize her life, and how a woman he wrongly judged ended up being the one who saved them both. In a quiet moment, he recounts the story, telling her about Dr. Chen and her incredible selflessness, how she gave her own blood without hesitation. Julia listens, her hand resting in his, her eyes widening with each word as she takes in the gravity of the story. She senses the transformation in Eric's tone, the weight in his words, and the way he describes Dr. Chen not just as a doctor, but as a person whose kindness transcended every barrier he'd set in his mind. Julia can see he's changed. She knows him well enough to sense the shift in his heart. Julia gives his hand a gentle squeeze, her eyes full of understanding and compassion. She doesn't judge him or scold him for the prejudice that nearly cost her life. Instead, she listens, offering him the support and empathy he needs. Her gaze reassures him, silently encouraging him to make amends, to take the next step beyond regret. She tells him softly, "Eric, you were given a second chance, not just for me, but for yourself. Don't let it pass you by. Make it mean something." Her words resonate deeply, and he feels a renewed sense of purpose. He knows that this experience has left him forever changed, but his gratitude and awareness will mean little unless he follows through on them. He stands by her side, holding her hand, feeling the quiet strength in her encouragement, and he knows that his path forward is clear. As the sun rises higher, Eric gathers his resolve, realizing there's something left to do, something he can't delay any longer. With a final look at Julia, he steps out of the room, determined to find Dr. Chen, who has become both his wife's savior and his own silent teacher. The hospital corridors seem less intimidating, the urgency and panic of the previous night replaced by a calm clarity in his heart. He knows now that his life, his perspective, has been irrevocably altered by a person he once dismissed, a woman whose kindness showed him a truth he could never ignore. When he finds Dr. Chen in the break room, she's seated with a cup of coffee, her posture relaxed, the weight of the night's ordeal finally starting to ease from her shoulders. She looks up as he enters, and there's a flicker of surprise, quickly followed by a calm, knowing look. She says nothing, allowing him the space to speak, her gaze gentle but steady, waiting to see what he has to say. Eric takes a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. He speaks slowly, his voice filled with a humility and gratitude he's rarely felt before. "Dr. Chen, I came here to say thank you," he begins, and there's a visible weight behind his words. "You saved my wife. You saved me from myself, from the person I thought I was, and you did it without a second thought. I realize now how wrong I was about you, about everything. You showed me something I didn't even know I needed to see. I'm sorry for doubting you, for judging you, for nearly letting my own biases put Julia at risk." Dr. Chen listens, a faint smile appearing, her expression understanding yet reserved. She's heard similar words before, but she can see the sincerity in Eric's eyes, the depth of his realization. For her, this moment isn't about accepting his apology, though she does appreciate it. It's about knowing that her actions have the potential to inspire change, to leave a positive impact that extends beyond this hospital, beyond this single life she saved. She reaches out, placing a hand on his arm, a small gesture that speaks volumes. "Eric, what matters most is what you do with this lesson. Prejudice can be blinding, yes, but it doesn't have to define you. It's up to you to decide how this experience shapes your future. People can change, and you have that choice now." Eric feels the weight of her words, recognizing the challenge and the opportunity they represent. She's handing him the responsibility to continue the journey she helped him begin, to take this understanding and bring it to life beyond these hospital walls. It's a responsibility he feels ready to embrace. He looks at her, nodding, feeling an inner strength he didn't know he possessed until now. "I won't forget this," he promises, his voice firm with conviction. I'm going to carry this with me. I'm going to make sure that my actions reflect what you've taught me. I want to be someone who sees people for who they are, not what I assume them to be. They share a moment of mutual respect and understanding, a quiet exchange that transcends the limitations of words. Dr. Chen's kindness has given him more than just a reason to be grateful. It's given him a purpose, a mission to confront his biases, to treat others with the respect and dignity they deserve. As he turns to leave, he feels a sense of peace, knowing he has taken the first step on a path of self-reflection and growth. Dr. Chen has become a permanent part of his story, a reminder of the power of compassion, the impact one person can have on another's life. Returning to Julia's side, Eric feels lighter, transformed. He sits beside her, and as they talk, she senses the change in him, the subtle shift in his demeanor, the openness in his heart. Together, they reflect on what happened, on the gift Dr. Chen has given them both. Eric shares his plans with Julia, his commitment to advocate for equality, to challenge his biases, and to speak out against prejudice in all its forms. He understands now that this experience isn't just a single event. It's a call to action, a responsibility he must carry forward. Over the next few days, Eric begins to see the world differently, approaching people with a newfound humility and curiosity. He seeks to understand rather than judge, to listen instead of assuming. In Dr. Chen's selflessness, he found a guide, a mentor who has reshaped his view of humanity, and he's determined to honor that gift. He begins to engage in conversations he once would have avoided, to challenge his friends and colleagues when he hears prejudiced comments, to reflect on his own actions with a critical eye. And so, Eric's journey of transformation takes root, a journey inspired by a single, profound act of compassion. Dr. Chen's blood saved Julia's life, but her kindness, her quiet courage, saved Eric's spirit, showing him a path toward understanding, toward unity, toward a better version of himself. He knows he will stumble, that old habits are hard to break, but he carries her example as a constant reminder that change is possible, that the best in humanity can overcome even the deepest biases. For the rest of his life, Eric becomes an advocate for equality, a voice that speaks out for compassion and respect, honoring Dr. Chen's lesson by spreading her message to others. He shares his story with anyone willing to listen, hoping that they too might see the world through a kinder lens, that they might find the courage to question their own assumptions, and that they too might become a force for good in a world too often divided by fear and prejudice. Dr. Chen's influence lives on in every life he touches, a ripple effect of kindness that reaches far beyond the walls of that hospital room, a legacy of compassion that transforms not just Eric, but everyone he meets. The room is filled with a gentle quietness, a sense of peace that seems to blanket the weariness left by the night's turmoil. Eric sits beside Julia, holding her hand, his heart swelling with gratitude, not just for her survival, but for the new understanding that has taken root within him. He feels compelled to share this moment of transformation with her fully, to tell her everything he's realized, not just about Dr. Chen, but about himself. In the dim morning light, with their hands clasped, he begins to speak, pouring out his reflections, his resolve, and the commitment he now feels to honor the lesson Dr. Chen has given him. He tells Julia how, in Dr. Chen, he saw a reflection of the person he wants to become, someone capable of setting aside judgment, extending compassion without hesitation. He speaks of his shame, the way his own biases had blinded him to Dr. Chen's strength and compassion, and how her selfless act had broken through those prejudices, forcing him to see her not as a stereotype, but as a person with an open heart and an unshakable sense of duty. Julia listens closely, her fingers gently brushing his, her face softened with understanding and pride. She knows this change is real. She sees it in his eyes, in the vulnerability and openness with which he speaks. "Julia," he says softly, "I've spent so much time living in my own little world, assuming I knew everything about people without ever really seeing them. But last night changed everything. Dr. Chen showed me a part of myself I didn't want to see, but it's something I needed to face. I want to do better. I want to see people for who they are, not who I assume them to be. I want to be someone you can be proud of, someone Dr. Chen would be proud of." Julia squeezes his hand, her own eyes brimming with emotion. She knows the courage it takes to confront oneself, to stand face to face with the darker parts of one's character and choose to change. She tells him gently, "Eric, I'm already proud of you. It takes strength to do what you're doing, to recognize this and make it a part of who you are. And I know you're going to make a difference, not just for yourself, but for others too." Her words bolster his resolve, and he feels a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to carry this lesson forward, to be an example of compassion and openness in a world that so desperately needs it. A few days later, as Julia prepares to be discharged, Eric is once again reminded of the woman who made this second chance possible. He feels a pull to see Dr. Chen one more time, to speak with her again, to thank her not only for saving Julia's life, but for opening his eyes. He finds her in the hallway, busy as always, her white coat trailing behind her as she speaks with a nurse. She notices him approaching and offers a small, kind smile, acknowledging him with a nod as he steps closer. He takes a breath, feeling the weight of his gratitude, the depth of his commitment to honor her actions. "Dr. Chen," he begins, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I wanted to thank you again. Not just for what you did for Julia, but for what you showed me. I've never met someone with your strength, your kindness. I know now that I have a long way to go, but because of you, I'm ready to take that journey. I'm ready to make things right, not just with you, but with everyone I've wronged in the past." Dr. Chen's face softens, a warmth in her eyes that reflects her understanding. She recognizes the sincerity in his words, the transformation that has taken place within him. For her, this isn't about being thanked. It's about seeing that her compassion, her dedication to her role as a healer, has had a lasting impact on someone's life. She nods, her voice gentle as she responds, "Eric, change is a process, a journey. But the fact that you're taking these first steps means everything. People can surprise you just as you've surprised me. And maybe one day you'll have the chance to help someone else see things differently too. That's how we make a difference, one person at a time." Her words linger with him, a reminder that change isn't always sweeping or immediate. It's built through small actions, through conscious choices that reflect the values he now holds. Eric realizes that this isn't just a single moment of redemption. It's the beginning of a lifelong commitment to live by the lessons he's learned, to advocate for understanding and compassion wherever he goes. In the days and weeks that follow, Eric dives into this journey with a newfound sense of purpose. He begins to read about perspectives he once dismissed, joining community discussions, listening to stories of people from diverse backgrounds and cultures. He understands that breaking down his own prejudices is a gradual process, one that requires constant reflection and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. He talks with friends and family, sharing the story of Dr. Chen's kindness, hoping it will inspire them as it has inspired him. In every conversation, he finds himself more open, more patient, and more aware of the assumptions he once made without question. One evening, Eric attends a local community event that promotes diversity and inclusion. He sits among strangers, people he once might have avoided or judged without a second thought. But now he listens attentively to each speaker, each story, each perspective, feeling his own understanding of the world expand with every passing moment. He reflects on Dr. Chen's words, her quiet courage, and her unwavering compassion. He remembers how she bridged the gap between them without anger or resentment, simply by choosing to act out of love and duty rather than judgment. At the end of the event, he finds himself in a conversation with a young man who shares his own struggles with prejudice and understanding. The man talks about his experiences, the biases he's faced, and the ways in which people's judgments have shaped his life. Eric listens, nodding, feeling a connection, a resonance that comes from his own recent experiences. And then, in a moment of vulnerability, he shares his story of Dr. Chen, the prejudice he once held, and the transformative power of her compassion. He tells the young man, "I once thought I knew people by looking at them. I thought I understood the world, but I was wrong. It took someone extraordinary to show me that kindness is stronger than any bias, that our actions can change someone's life if we're willing to set aside judgment." The young man looks at Eric, his eyes reflecting a mixture of empathy and respect, and they shake hands, a gesture that symbolizes more than just a meeting of strangers. It's an unspoken commitment to foster a world that values humanity over division. Eric realizes that this is his new path, his new purpose. To carry Dr. Chen's lesson forward, to become a voice for understanding, a force for unity in a world that too often seeks to divide. Over time, Eric becomes a quiet advocate for empathy and equality. He doesn't make grand speeches or seek recognition, but he takes small, meaningful actions. He volunteers, he listens, he reaches out to those who might feel isolated or judged, sharing his story when it feels right. Through these actions, he feels a sense of fulfillment he never expected, a peace that comes from knowing he's working to bridge divides rather than create them. Julia sees this transformation in him, and their relationship deepens as they continue to reflect on what they've learned. They talk often of Dr. Chen, of the night that changed their lives, and they remain grateful for the gift she gave them, both the gift of life and the gift of perspective. For Eric, Dr. Chen's influence is ever present, a reminder that kindness has the power to change hearts, to shift perspectives, to heal wounds even beyond those that are physical. And so, Eric's journey continues, each day an opportunity to live out the lesson he learned in that hospital room. Dr. Chen may never fully know the impact she's had on him, but he carries her influence in every interaction, every choice, every moment he chooses compassion over judgment. Through his actions, her legacy lives on, a ripple effect of kindness and empathy that stretches far beyond the walls of that hospital, changing lives one person at a time. In honoring her, Eric finds his own redemption, a path forward shaped by humility, understanding, and a commitment to be the best version of himself, not just for Dr. Chen, but for all those he encounters, building a bridge between people, one act of kindness at a time. As Eric reflects on his journey, he feels compelled to share it not just with his family and friends, but with a wider audience, hoping that his story might spark conversations and inspire others to question their own assumptions. With Julia's encouragement, he decides to put his thoughts into words, crafting a message that captures the depth of his transformation. It's an opportunity to open a dialogue, to connect with others who may have felt the same biases, and to offer them a different path forward. A path illuminated by Dr. Chen's quiet, unwavering kindness. After drafting and refining his story, he decides to share it on a social media platform, posting it with a sense of nervous anticipation. His words are simple yet heartfelt, detailing how a single act of compassion shattered the prejudices he'd held for so long. He describes the night he nearly lost Julia, how his demand for a different doctor nearly cost him everything, and how Dr. Chen's selflessness became his saving grace. He doesn't shy away from admitting his faults, his past ignorance, and the blinders he'd allowed to shape his understanding of people. In his post, he writes, "I learned the hard way that prejudice can be blinding. It can lead us to dismiss the very people who have the strength and kindness to save us in more ways than one. I judge someone without knowing her. And in doing so, I almost lost the person I loved most." But that very person, Dr. Chen, chose compassion over anger, humanity over hate, and through her actions, she taught me more than words ever could. I hope that by sharing this, others might reflect, reconsider, and find the courage to see people for who they are, beyond our biases. We all have so much to learn from one another if we're willing to look beyond the surface. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Comments start pouring in, people sharing their own stories of transformation, of moments when they faced their biases and chose compassion instead. Some write about times they'd been judged unfairly and how they'd longed for understanding and acceptance. Others thank Eric for his honesty, admitting that they too have struggled with prejudice and are inspired to make changes in their own lives. The post becomes a powerful thread of shared experiences, a gathering place for people to express, reflect, and support one another in the pursuit of a more compassionate world. Encouraged by the response, Eric decides to engage further, responding to comments, asking questions, and encouraging others to share their perspectives. His story becomes a catalyst for countless conversations, sparking discussions about empathy, humility, and the courage to confront one's own assumptions. People from all walks of life join in, creating a ripple effect of understanding that reaches far beyond Eric's original intent. Each response fuels his determination, reinforcing the knowledge that Dr. Chen's influence didn't end with him. It's spreading, touching lives, and inspiring change on a larger scale. The story doesn't stop there. Over the following weeks, local organizations reach out to Eric, asking if he'd be willing to speak at community events to share his experience and the lessons he's learned. At first, he's hesitant, unsure if he's the right person to take on such a role. But Julia, ever supportive, reminds him that his story has already begun to touch lives, that his journey is a valuable one that others might need to hear. With her encouragement, he agrees, stepping into a role he never imagined for himself, an advocate for empathy, a voice speaking out against prejudice. At his first event, Eric feels the weight of the moment, the expectation of the audience as they settle into their seats, waiting to hear his story. He takes a breath, grounding himself in the memory of Dr. Chen, in the compassion and humility she displayed so effortlessly. He begins by recounting the night at the hospital, his initial anger, his demands, and the profound transformation he experienced in the wake of Dr. Chen's selfless act. He speaks from the heart, candidly admitting his faults, his past prejudices, and the journey he's undertaken to become a better person. He describes the way Dr. Chen's compassion shattered his assumptions, offering him not only a second chance with Julia, but a chance to rebuild his character. The audience listens intently, some nodding, others visibly moved. At the end of his story, there's a pause, a silence that feels charged with understanding, as if everyone in the room is taking a moment to process his words. When the applause begins, it's not just a recognition of his story, but a celebration of the courage it takes to confront one's own prejudices and choose a different path. People approach him afterward, thanking him for his honesty, sharing their own experiences, and asking how they too can make similar changes in their lives. Inspired by this experience, Eric continues to share his story at other events, each time refining his message, each time reaching more people who feel touched by the story of Dr. Chen's compassion and the transformation it sparked within him. He becomes a quiet force for change in his community, someone people look up to as an example of redemption and empathy. He starts partnering with local schools and community centers, leading workshops that encourage open dialogue about prejudice, empathy, and understanding. He engages with young people, hoping to reach them early, to help them recognize and dismantle biases before they take root. One day, as Eric prepares for another event, he receives an unexpected message, a note from Dr. Chen herself. She thanks him for carrying forward the message of compassion, for choosing to turn his experience into something meaningful, something that reaches beyond his own life. She tells him that his work is proof of the power of kindness, a testament to the belief that change is always possible. Eric is moved beyond words, feeling the significance of her acknowledgement, the full circle moment of knowing that he has honored her gift in a way that extends beyond anything he could have imagined. In the months that follow, Eric's online post continues to circulate, gaining traction as more people come across it, read his story, and feel inspired to look inward. He receives messages from strangers across the country, people who tell him that his words made them stop and think, that they've chosen to approach others with more empathy because of his story. Some reach out to tell him about their own moments of transformation, sharing stories of times when they too were confronted with their biases and chose to change. Each message reinforces his conviction, each story a reminder of the impact Dr. Chen's compassion continues to have, radiating outward in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Eric's life has taken on a new purpose, a mission he embraces wholeheartedly. He knows he may never fully repay Dr. Chen for the lesson she taught him, but he also knows that every act of kindness, every conversation he engages in, every mind he helps to open is a step toward honoring the compassion she showed him. He remains committed to fostering a world where understanding triumphs over prejudice, where kindness becomes the norm, and where people are valued for their humanity rather than their appearances or backgrounds. And so, Eric's journey comes full circle. What began as a night of fear, prejudice, and near loss has transformed into a life defined by purpose, empathy, and a relentless pursuit of understanding. Through his story, he continues to inspire others to reflect, to reconsider their assumptions, and to choose compassion over judgment. Dr. Chen's act of kindness lives on in every person touched by Eric's words, every life he influences, and every barrier broken down by the quiet power of empathy. As Eric looks back, he realizes that his life is no longer just his own. It's a testament to the power of one person's actions to inspire change in others. His voice, once silent in the face of prejudice, has become a tool for unity. A reminder that we are all capable of growth, of redemption, and of becoming better, kinder versions of ourselves. Dr. Chen's compassion continues to ripple through the lives of countless others, an endless chain of understanding and hope. And Eric, forever grateful, stands as a bridge between his own past and a future built on empathy and connection.